The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
The following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
By tomorrow, I will rule the world!
You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Well, I must have not been paying attention when you were just talking to me. Do you think that you could repeat the question and I listen more attentively? There must have been something in all of that nothing that wasn't quite so easy to see. And I must have missed something when you were just talking to me.
No, leave that up if you can. No, you can't. No. It's gone? Is that all we have?
That's all we have. That's the whole open.
I don't know how did that get truncated? Like, I had a big long, it was like 2 minutes. We had a video. Whatever happened to all that?
I don't know. I'll look into that.
Yeah.
You know, that was before my time.
That's true. I'm not interested in, like, who's responsible.
Well, Mr. Jonathan.
Mr. Jonathan. See how he is?
He's on vacation.
Hey, how you guys doing? Tom Duggan here in the Paying Attention podcast every Thursday here at 2 o'clock at high atop Two Guys Smoke Shop in Salem, New Hampshire at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. We have no Paul today, which is kind of good because we have a guest in the studio today who is all things politics. Now, I've known this guy for quite a while. Actually, the first time I heard from this guy, he was thinking of running for city council in Amesbury, Massachusetts. Sent me a press release, asked me if I could put it in the paper. I'm like, yeah, he's a conservative guy. We'll help him out. We put it in the paper, and then he called me like 2 weeks later and said, yeah, I'm not running. I'm like, I'm going to kill this guy. So he disappeared from my life for about a year, and all of a sudden he called me out of the blue and said, hey, I went to Dartmouth, and I want to go up. There's a presidential debate at Dartmouth. Can I get like press credentials from you and go up and do a story for you? And I was like, great, free work. I'm always up for free work. And he called me like that night and said, hey, I hear Newt Gingrich is one of your heroes. How'd you like to talk to him? And then handed the phone to Newt Gingrich. And I was like, this guy needs to be in our network. We need to have this guy around. So ever since then, Alex and I have been friends. He manages my portfolio. He's all things politics on the national level. He's certainly all things politics here in New Hampshire. So why don't I introduce him and let him tell you more about who he is before we get into all these topics, Alex?
I might tell the story slightly different of how we found one another. And so when I came back to New England around 2011, was trying to get the lay of the land after spending 6 years out in the Midwest, I happened upon the Valley Patriot. And what impressed me about the newspaper is the same thing actually that impressed Speaker Gingrich about the newspaper when I showed it to him was, wow, look at all these advertisers. You know, this guy is connected to the small business community. Wow, this guy cares about cops, firefighters, veterans, kids saving for college, and all the rest. So talk about the mayor of the Merrimack Valley of sorts. So it's always good to network, but networking with such a maven networker kind of lets you save yourself a lot of time and worries and meet a lot of good peoples. So that's the main reason I wanted to meet you. Man, what a shortcut to getting reacclimated to the community, man.
Right. Well, listen, we're glad to have him because he's done an awful lot for us over the years. He even got us like a 1 hour one-on-one interview with Newt Gingrich when Newt was like the favorite to be president at that point. Like he was polling first. What was that, 8 years ago maybe?
Yeah, sometime in 2011, 2012.
Yeah, something like that. And I was just like to meet Newt Gingrich, much less sit down and like debate with him and do an interview. And that was great. And you've been involved in a lot of different campaigns. You do a lot of political consulting, especially here up in New Hampshire. So I thought you'd be the perfect guy to bring in for the show after the election to talk about like what happened and what does this mean. You know, if you put on CNN, if you put on Fox, it's mostly just white noise. They're all just repeating what everybody else is saying. Fox watches CNN, CNN watches MSNBC. It's like this mutual masturbation society. They all just regurgitate what each other says without even giving it any thought to see if like, wait, does that even make sense? So I always like to have local people because I always say if you're not sure what the national narrative is, whether it's true or it's not true, whether it's bull or it's not, always look at the local level.
Sure.
So it's always good to have local people on. So you've been very intimately involved in some of the New Hampshire elections. So we haven't covered that a whole lot. Why don't we talk a little bit about that first?
Yeah, happy to do that, especially for the Merrimack Valley spanning Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Most people know Tom as a North Andover, Lawrence guy, and here we are recording the podcast in Salem, New Hampshire. So happy to give some of the New Hampshire perspective on what happened and what didn't happen this past Tuesday. We had a governor reelected very comfortably, and the cheer when he entered the room, 2 more years, because we know 4 more years at least has a little bit of initial rhyme going to it, but New Hampshire, like Vermont, only states with 2-year gubernatorial terms left. Massachusetts had 2-year terms right up until around the time you were born, but earliest Massachusetts actually had 1-year terms. So John Hancock was a 1-term, 1-year governor of Massachusetts. But yeah, in New Hampshire, we have a very weak structural governor. Not only is it just a 2-year term, but we effectively have a bicameral executive branch. I know you hosted a governor's council debate for Massachusetts. Our executive council in New Hampshire does quite a bit more. Not only are they involved in judge and other kinds of nominees, but they approve contracts of over $25,000.
Wow.
So talk about real micromanagement within the state. So governor is a tough job in New Hampshire, but Chris Sununu ran on a platform of full day kindergarten, which was one of his first initiatives as governor. A lot of things is pretty hard to disagree with.
That's like a dagger in my heart.
Yeah. Well, he's youngest governor in America and a lot of energy, for those wannabe ticket splitters. He was the Republican who people in New Hampshire voted for on Tuesday. The congressional races were not as competitive. My home 1st district, a little bit more so than the 2nd, but we can talk about each of those or any race.
Was Jean Shaheen up this year?
She was not. She's going to be up in 2020 should she wish to run
I want to
again.
come up to New Hampshire and help defeat her. So you just let me know when that happens, because I want to come up and defeat her.
If she does not run, her daughter Stephanie could. The soon-to-be first-time Congressman Chris Pappas in the 1st District, who is the owner of the Puritan Backroom Restaurant in Manchester, he could be a quick promotion. He was on a short list to run for U.S. Senate even prior to his U.S. congressional win. He served on the Executive Council for a number of years, so he would be an early Democratic frontrunner should Senator Shaheen not wish to run for re-election. And in terms of people who would maybe look to take her on, maybe a comeback attempt by former Senator Kelly Ayotte, who's now serving on several corporate boards after her narrow loss to Governor Maggie Hassan 2 years ago.
Yeah, and she blew it. I mean, I was very big on her. She was a friend of Scott Brown. Scott Brown called me. Actually, his wife called me because I love her, and asked me if I could, give her some help in New Hampshire if I had friends up here. So I said, you know what, I'm going to go up. I'm going to help Kelly Ayotte. And I was very happy to walk away from her when she refused to stand for Donald Trump. When that whole scandal happened where he said he grabs women let them grab him, whatever, and everybody was making it like this is the end of Trump, it's awful, it's terrible, and people were throwing him under the bus, and she threw him under the bus, and I walked away, and I hated to walk away. I thought she was a great candidate. I thought she would have been a great senator. But I think she just didn't get the landscape. I think she just didn't understand what was going on in the culture and in the country.
I think she sort of met people part way because she did write in then Governor Mike Pence. So it's not like she was such of a squish that she wrote in a Jeff Flake or a Ben Sass or something. She came much more to not just the center right, but a conservative right. She was more comfortable with an establishment conservative.
Yeah, but she threw her vote away, and she hurt Donald Trump. Her vote should have gone to Donald Trump.
Two other things I'll say in quick defense of her. She did a great job of becoming a national United States senator, which Senator Shaheen has not become, other than being on a short list for a vice presidential running mate for John Kerry and Barack Obama. She doesn't go on the Sunday shows, and Kelly Ayotte obviously built up her national security bona fides, was a regular on those programs. So I appreciated her making her leadership from the state a national platform. That was a nice thing that we had going. And I'll say that her final 36-hour close before her race 2 years ago was impressive. She was meeting truck drivers at diners, and my goodness, her voice was incredibly hoarse that night. She shared a ballroom with Chris Sununu when he won, and we called it a night for her, with it being unclear whether she'd prevail or not. But she closed hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think had she come out and defended Donald Trump, do the hard thing when it's important, when it matters, I think she would have got reelected. People like me would have stayed on the campaign, and we would have worked even harder for her. She would have won.
And I think somebody who agrees with your analysis and punditry right there would be Fergus Cullen, for example, of Dover, a former New Hampshire Republican Party chair who is a never-Trumper, but absolutely acknowledges that he was wrong in thinking that Trump would drag down the ticket when, in fact, what we saw 2 years ago and what we saw 2 days ago was that he pulled people up. He specifically said in his remarks at the press conference yesterday that of those people who won, and he said that 9 of the 11 people he campaigned for in the final week did prevail. He said some of these are great people, but they're people who nobody really knew. Now they're going to be known.
Listen, I think what the media misses, especially CNN, I think what the Democrats certainly miss is that Donald Trump is not a politician. And he speaks like I speak, right? Like I come on this show and I just talk like a regular person. And the average person, when they put on CNN, when they put on Fox, when they put on MSNBC, most of what gets talked about goes over their head. Nobody knows what a per pupil ratio is. Nobody understands what cloture means.
The average person doesn't watch CNN. So there's a joke that our society has become so divided that if you watch Fox, you're conservative. If you watch MSNBC, you're liberal. If you watch CNN, your flight's delayed and you're at the airport.
Right.
But guess what? If your flight's delayed and you're at the airport, you're not an average person because the average person isn't a commercial jet slider.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So they are increasingly insignificant.
I watch CNN all day, every day in my office. Keeps my blood pressure up. I'm constantly yelling at the screen. I'm constantly crumpling up papers and throwing it at the screen. It's almost like I'm still on the air, even though I'm alone in my office. Because I believe as a journalist, as a news guy, I want to see how they're doing it wrong to make sure I never do that. And we were watching yesterday the press conference with Jim Acosta and the president. Jim Acosta happens to be one of the worst journalists ever. He really seems to think that a journalist's job is to debate with people and give your opinions. He starts almost every podcast, every report with Donald Trump lied today, and he lied about yesterday's lie by saying that yesterday's lie wasn't a lie, and he's a lying liar who lies. And I'm like, wait a minute, how is that objective journalism? Your job is to ask a question, write down the answer, and report what people say. When I was interviewing Christina Minicucci yesterday, she won for state representative in the North Andover Methuen district in Massachusetts. We were talking about different things. I was asking her questions, and she has to go off the record and said, "You're not going to make me look bad, are you?" I said, "Look, my job isn't to make you look anything. My job is to ask the question, write down your answer, and publish it. That's my job." So even though she's a left-wing hippie moonbat who I actually ended up voting for, believe it or not, because the other guy was just so horrible. My job is not to portray her as a left-wing hippie moonbat, even though that's what I think of her. My job is to ask her, what do you think about education? What do you think about the opioid crisis? Write down her answer and just friggin' publish it. And guys like Acosta, guys like Don Lemon, CNN, even Hannity on Fox, everybody on MSNBC, they think being a journalist means to take a side and be a cheerleader for that side. And I've been saying this now forever, I wish I had a rich friend that would buy a national TV news network and let me run it. Because we would call it Just News. And there would be no opinion. Maybe like at midnight we do like a 1-hour opinion show. But other than that, it would just be, here's what happened in Kansas yesterday. Here's what happened in California, there was a shooting. Here's what happened in Florida, there was a tornado. And then move on to the next story and stop with all these panel opinion discussion things disguised as news to manipulate people to get them to vote the way they want them to.
As a New England guy, my wife would say, all right, if you did that, you would have to, keep your focus. Because she tells me a story of a pizza place when she grew up that was called something Just Pizza. And then it became Just Pizza and Subs. And they started attacking on other things. But what you were describing about the role of the journalists, the on-camera questioning journalists, even when given the opportunity for a press conference, I'm a lawyer by training and I teach law at several colleges, and the phrase that comes to mind is anticipatory repudiation, which is something that judges hate. You like people to kind of own your part of a bargain and not just assume that the other side is going to do something that you're going to oppose.
Right.
And so you mentioned people saying lie, 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 liar, liar, liar. The thing that I can tell when there's a hostile media environment is when people say, Mr. President, and they're saying Mr. President like a CD is skipping.
Right.
Without you're going to get a response. Slow down.
Right.
So
I will call on you. I have a friend who's very, very close to the president. and we talk all the time. He actually works in the press office or near the press office. And I always tell him, listen, I was an elected official, right? So I was a school board member in Lawrence. We lost accreditation like my third week in office, right? So we have this press conference, and the superintendent had a few remarks, then he asked me to speak. So I got up to speak, and people started asking questions about other stuff, like, things that had nothing to do with why we were there. And I would say, you know what? We're not here for that today. Today we're here to talk about the state coming in and trying to take over the school system. Today we're here to talk about the loss of accreditation. If you want to ask those questions, you can ask them after the press conference. And I keep telling my friend to please pass up the chain. When Sarah Sanders is there or the president is there, if he's there with the premier or with the prime minister of whatever, China, and they're there to talk about Chinese trade, and someone starts asking questions about Jeff Sessions, did you say, you know what, we're not here for that?
Yeah, I think
we're just not here for that.
Yeah, your service in that era, I think Robert's Rules of Order came across conservative. Now in 2018, I think Robert's Rules of Order is a microaggression.
Right. Yeah. Right. No, that's exactly right. So we watch these ridiculous reports on what's called the news today, which is clearly not news, and it gives people a really bizarre impression of what's going on in the country, which isn't even close to what's real. You know what's real because you work with a lot of candidates all over the country. Talk about some of the races that you were involved in during this campaign and how you see the results of the Senate staying Republican, the House moving to Democrat, affecting our personal lives in the next 2 years.
Yeah. So from
how does it benefit me, or how does it be a deterrent for me?
Yeah. So in the 2-month sprint that we have in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, from our very late primary elections to the general election, things pretty much wound up as predicted. I found no surprises in New Hampshire or Massachusetts. So what happened really in the final weeks of the campaign is the resources of Democrats and Republicans were deployed to different places. So what I saw happen is that some of the people involved in the volunteer canvassing kind of political operations community and those in more of the election protection, honest ballot law kind of volunteerism, which is my specialty, we got deployed to different places, frankly. By the vast right-wing conspiracy. So I had a friend getting out the vote in Nevada who was a candidate in the 2nd Congressional District earlier at the primary stage. And then I was actually over in upstate New York in New York 19 in support of the state GOP Honest Ballot Initiative, specifically for Congressman John Faso there. And I would say that race kind of showed us that, all right, if you have a New Hampshire guy who's leaving New Hampshire 1, a congressional district that Trump carried 2 years ago, but a Democrat was elected to Congress, it's now an open seat. The fact that I wasn't kind of asked to stay home, nor go to Maine 2nd, which was polling at 47-47 in the days up to the election, kind of suggested that, the party was placing bets in other areas. So what I found disappointing about that race in New York 19, where Vice President Biden came out to support the upstart challenging Democrat there, was that the Republican there was not a far-right Republican. He was a member of what's called the Problem Solvers Caucus in the U.S. House, which is a 48-member caucus. He acknowledges global climate change and has legislation and other efforts to do something about it, to leverage that from a variety of different ways. So the fact that a problem solver centrist Republican, who, by the way, lost 2 statewide races in New York previously to candidates who were ultimately indicted upon their victories. If you're not going to give a guy like that a pass, we're not going to give everyone a pass. So John Meacham, who is a journalist / historian who you probably don't like very much, one thing that he said on air yesterday that I really agree with was all the people who say that the battle, the extremes and everything is, that's not who we are. He says, well, that's kind of exactly who we are.
Right.
Because what I've seen in my experience is some of the centrists, moderates of sorts, they're not given a pass. They're really not all that celebrated until after they lose.
Right.
That's when the John McCains of the world are revenerated.
Right.
That's when the H.W. Bushes and the W. Bushes even, people, find their faith and kind of misremember the halcyon days of their leadership. So I think the story on a going forward basis is one of further division. Because even short of the new census and the redistricting and some of those issues that are going to come up in the next few years, the moderates weren't appreciated on either side.
Yeah, I always get frustrated because I always watch everything from a news angle. And my frustration is the Democrats have been, and the left has been so violent. They've been so divisive. And anytime you call them out, the first thing you hear from any liberal in the room, any liberal within earshot is, Trump does it. What about when Trump does it? How come you don't talk about when Trump does it? Well, because you guys do that 24/7. We know Trump does it. But if you're going to attack Donald Trump for being divisive, and then you're divisive, you now have no credibility. And now that we've got a House that's going to be Democrat, we've got the Senate has been maintained by the Republicans, Nancy Pelosi, of all people, comes out and actually starts to look like the peacemaker. How did that happen?
Now, one difference that we have in terms of kind of that narrative, which is probably more true in big states, is in a place like New Hampshire, the Democratic Party is really very impressively organized. And so some of the fallout in terms of the fact that both houses of our state legislature flipped Democrat, both U.S. House seats, went Democrat. Pretty much everything did, short of the governorship. There's one very prominent operative in New Hampshire who says that the New Hampshire Republican Campaign Committee walked away from New Hampshire, that the New Hampshire Republican Party itself is not a 24/7, 365 kind of an operation like the Democrats. So that's definitely a story of what's going on or what's not going on in New Hampshire, is the fact that the Democrats have 24 full-time employees. The Republican Party has but 2 in a crumbling building in Concord. So a lot of times people talk about the party, but the party is maybe giving the sense of more of an institution with more infrastructure than truly exists. Right. And so I actually experienced some of what I did in my educator role in terms of connecting people to some insights to what's going on in the operations of things. We give the State Department, or the State Department gives grants to bring in people from all around the world to observe our democracy in the lead up to elections. And there's one group, the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire, which had some State Department grants and brought some people in, and they were looking to see stuff on both sides. And there frankly wasn't that much to show them or to direct them to. They were actually doing a wonderful job of trying to see the Republican side of things. They were just having a hard time finding the right contacts or the right places to go or the right places to visit, because there were not as many local offices. So in some ways, believe it or not, nonprofits in the State Department are propping up the Republican Party in some ways in New Hampshire in terms of the appearance of a vigorous 50-50 side of things. And I recall even the media doing that, because I have witnessed firsthand an ABC News affiliate visit a presidential campaign office and say, hey, could you have some people pick up some phones? We want to get some B-roll. Let's make it look busy like a bustling campaign office. So they're trying to prop up the appearance of an active, ready-to-go, well-oiled machine Republican Party. I've seen the New York Times do the same thing in Stratham, New Hampshire.
Can I stop you there? We talk about this on the show all the time. Isn't that more proof that the media is full of shit? That everything they do is scripted? I mean, they didn't want to come in while you were busy and film you. They wanted you to pretend you were busy so they could make it look a certain way, which is actually fake. I mean, Donald Trump is, if you think he's wrong about everything he says, the one thing he's not wrong about is fake news. The news is so fake, it's unbelievable. Everything they do is made up.
Some of what they engage in is, I'm going to go ahead and call fake nationalism, because they're trying to show grassroots democracy on a side where maybe it's not happening. Maybe the story is that the Republicans aren't that organized, that there's not a lot of spirit or momentum. Mm-hmm. They were stirring up some momentum.
Right.
I've seen the New York Times interview Bobby Jindal when he was running for president and say, oh, why don't we stage you by this barn with the American flag to make you look at your very best?
Right.
That doesn't sound like something that you would think that the New York Times would do.
Right.
But they actually do. They want the shot. They want the Americana. And you'll remember that President Obama repeatedly said that his story could only happen in America. And I remember when he said that and thinking, that is quite nationalist. Mm-hmm. Your story couldn't happen in Australia?
Yep.
What an insult to Australia.
Right.
I thought that they were more progressive.
Yeah.
I thought they were more modern, but apparently not.
I don't think he meant it, but he was right.
That's what I'm saying. The media and the president are more nationalist, patriotic, if you will. They just don't always, use those terms which are triggering for folks.
For a guy who tried to fundamentally change America, right? Everything he did was to fundamentally change America with his hope and change. Then he comes out with this rhetoric about how, America's... this is the only country in the world where I could do this. And you think about things like Colin Kaepernick and all these rich guys who are on football teams that are taking a knee for the national anthem. And you look at them and you just think, do you think you could do that in Mexico? Like, do you think don't even go to like an oppressive Muslim country? How about like in France? Do you think you could do that in France and get away with that? You couldn't. This is the greatest country in the world, and people who complain about it is, I think, a testament to how great we are. That we're so rich and so fat and so happy and so spoiled that we run around complaining about stupid things.
Yeah, and there are people who would suggest that what you just intimated is calling for a literacy test, because it's like, what's it saying? Kaepernick cannot protest without knowing who Francis Scott Key is and making sure that he knows every word of said anthem. What standard are we going to hold people to before they're able to offer an opinion?
Right.
Is our free speech, does it celebrate uninformed opinion?
Right. Okay, we get about 5 minutes before our first break. So with the Senate holding, with the Republicans holding the Senate, with the Democrats now taking the House, what does this mean for me? I think most people, they don't follow politics because they don't think it invades their personal life. They don't think it's going to affect their personal life, but it does. And you'd be the perfect guy to, I think, answer this question. What does the Democrats taking the House now mean for the average person?
Yeah, I think not as much. I think gridlock is the story. America tends to favor a divided government, whether that's across houses of Congress or Congress and the presidency, because remember, when Newt Gingrich did lead that Republican takeover in 1994, the U.S. House had been in Democratic leadership for 40 years prior to that. So in those cases, the divided government was between the legislature and the presidency. Now we have kind of more of a discussion of the judiciary in terms of our divided government. But I think that just that bicameral division within Congress itself is going to mean a lot of status quo. So I think that
that's bad for Donald Trump and for Donald Trump's vision of what he wants to accomplish. Gridlock is not a good thing if you're a Trump fan.
I perhaps disagree, because I think the messaging on infrastructure and a variety of things, if it doesn't happen in the next 2 years, he all of a sudden has a foil, and a foil or two. Because if it's Nancy Pelosi as House Speaker, sure. Maxine Waters, should she become chair of the House Financial Services Committee, I don't think anyone really believes that legislation that she champions is going to become law, that's going to have huge impacts on my primary industry of financial services or too many others. I don't think it's going to be great news or bad news for the consumer or the business owner, because we have the U.S. Senate as such a robust check. We have more Republican U.S. senators than we've had in 100 years, in the time since the constitutional amendment championed by Teddy Roosevelt to have popular election of U.S. senators. So back in the days of state legislatures choosing the representatives, there was a time when there were more than the 55 or so. But right now, this is a very robust Republican U.S. Senate. So if something even like judgeships is something that's become personal, that day-to-day people who are not lawyers care about, who got interested in matters of Merrick Garland and Justice Kavanaugh and what have you. I saw this morning that Justice Ginsburg broke 3 ribs. So she at 85 and Justice Breyer at 80 means that the Supreme Court is something that's going to be watched a bit more. And the divided government is less important for that, because that's all about U.S. Senate for advise and consent. The U.S. House plays no role in that. I think, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, I think that the Republicans lost the House because they made promises that they didn't keep. They all ran saying we're gonna build a wall, we're gonna lower taxes, we're gonna try and reinforce the family. They had all these conservative messages. Then they didn't do any of it, right? They didn't repeal Obamacare. They didn't fund the wall. They could have, in the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, they could have accomplished everything they've always said they wanted to do. And then they didn't do it. And I think a lot of Republicans stayed home on the congressional races for those exact reasons, that they made promises, they didn't keep them, and guess what? People remember, people notice. Yeah, I think there was less of a they. I didn't see as much in terms of a capital steps contract with America sort of a thing. Paul Ryan was a lame duck speaker on the way out. I didn't Emphasis hear them, on lame. Yeah, I didn't hear them campaigning on that second round of tax cuts where in the day and a half prior to the election, there was a suggestion of a new 10% middle class tax cut. That was too late to get out as a message. Yeah, no, I agree. All right, let's take a quick break. We're going to pay some bills. We're going to thank our sponsors, especially Angelo at A&M Auto Body. Angelo over there, if something happens to your car over there, you want to bring it down to Angelo over at South Broadway in Lawrence. I was actually live driving around Lawrence chasing police calls one night, and I got hit. And went right from the accident, drove right to Angelo's,
dropped off my car. He took care of it. It looks better than new.
Guerrilla journalism, guerrilla advertising. I love it.
Exactly. Back after this, I'm paying attention with Alex Talcott. A&M Auto Body. We got our friend Angelo over there. Angelo Memolo over there. He does great work on your car. So if you got a ding in your car, somebody hit you, you got a mechanical problem, you bring it to A&M Auto. He's on South Broadway in Lawrence on Inman Street. Angelo will take care of you. So what's the address there?
341 South Broadway, Lawrence, Massachusetts.
I don't know why these guys love me so much. I really don't. But Twin Lights, let me tell you how dedicated I am to helping my sponsors. The guys at Twin Lights Security needed an extra security guy to do private investigations and to do security for a certain thing in Boston. And they posted it on my page and asked if it was okay if they could use my page to solicit hiring people. And I said, you know what? As busy as I am, these guys sponsor the show. They sponsor the Valley Patriot. They give us $1,000 for the bash. I'm going to go work for these guys. So I called up Pat McLaughlin and I said, look, you help us every single time we need something. Whenever I put out a call, you're there. If you need an extra person and you're short, I'll take the night off and I'll come work for you. And so I have been. I've been doing some work for them because they're helping us. And so there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to find a way to help them in the meantime. So if you need security or if you're getting divorced and you need a private investigator, if you have a business and you need a private investigator or security, you want to call Twin Lights Security. They're based out of Gloucester, but they're very local. If while I'm driving around Lawrence, I get shot and killed, make sure you get my body to Perez Funeral Home because we do business with the people who do business with us. And he's on South Broadway with it's the old Scott Funeral Home. If you're an old-time Lawrence resident, it's the old Scott Funeral Home on South Broadway. Perez Funeral Home at 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. They do crematory services. They do all the stuff that they're supposed to do, right? And Mike's a big fan of the show. He followed us when we go live. He's an advertiser now in the print edition of the paper, and he's now sponsoring this program. Perez Funeral Home and Crematory Services, 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. We appreciate him. Franklin Veloz from Veloz Auto Group. He specializes in people that have maybe bad credit, no credit. Maybe you haven't had a job for a long period of time, so you don't think that maybe you qualify for a car loan. Usually, they want you to have a job for a year or more. He specializes in getting people who have bad credit or no credit or maybe spotty credit, getting them into a used car. He used to work for Charlie Dare's Commonwealth Motors for a long, long time, so he knows his stuff. I think he was the credit manager over there or something. So he knows what he's doing, and he follows us live, too. I really appreciate that he does. Every time I see him pop on, I'm very excited about it. And I was there yesterday to deliver his newspaper, and he said he's already had customers come in from us talking about him on this show. So we appreciate Veloz Auto Group. Go see Franklin. He's at 17 Mass Ave. It's right at the very beginning of Mass Ave on the Lawrence North Andover line. Alrighty then.
Welcome back.
Very good. Welcome back to the Paying Attention podcast. High atop Two Guys Smoke Shop at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. We're drinking our Two Guys Smoke Shop Sarsaparilla, which was nicely provided by Dave Garofalo here at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. I'm trying to give as many shameless plugs in as I possibly can.
You're sassy. Enjoy some sarsaparilla.
I am. We also want to encourage you. There are a couple of other podcasts that tape here in the studio. We're all part of a network. We love most of those guys. And I only say most because there's a couple I haven't met yet. But I was on the Writer's Block last week, and it was a lot of fun. And it's actually a really good show. I've actually been downloading and listening to some of their older programs because I'm a writer, obviously, so I'm interested in that. So you might want to take a listen to that and subscribe to their podcast. Political TNT with Tom and Nancy Troy. Funniest podcast you're ever going to watch or listen to. They literally sit here, they're brother and sister, and they literally sit here and yell at each other for a half an hour. And sometimes it even comes to blows. Last week she threw water on him in the middle of the show, and I thought he was going to punch her out. So for entertainment value alone, that's actually a really great show. And there's a new show that's going to be starting. Craig is here from Success in the 603, and he's going to be promoting businesses in New Hampshire. So we want to welcome him to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Encourage you to go to his Facebook page, Success in the 603, and go to his podcast and listen. Have you already done your first podcast? So you're going to be doing that today. So he's going to do his first podcast today, so look him up. And then there's the one that I thought, geez, I figured we talk about bitches on the show, right, Ed?
Yeah.
And I thought for sure she was going to, like, invite me on the show or at least call me and yell at me about what I talked about.
You want me to put in a good word for you?
Yeah, or, no, a bad word.
All right.
Why don't you put in a bad word for me?
That might do it.
Because I'm watching her show, and she's amazingly hot, right? And you know me, because I'm a single guy, right? So I'm watching, and like in the first 2 minutes, I'm like, you know what? I'd love to have her on my show. And wouldn't you know it, the next word out of her mouth was a word we never talk about. We never want to hear if you're a single guy. Husband.
Oh, yeah.
She talked about her husband for like 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, you just ruined the fantasy. Now what am I going to do?
Skip the last few episodes because he's on them.
Oh, my God. She had the husband on the show?
She did.
Oh, my goodness. All right. I'm going to have to go back and watch the old shows then. I can't watch the one with the husband on it. I at least want to pretend in my mind that I have a shot. You know, when we just get a husband, then what am I going to do? I understand he's like a big karate guy or something, self-defense guy too.
Yeah, he owns a dojo.
Yeah, so that just kind of kills it for me. But who knows? Eventually, maybe we'll be able to do some cross promotions anyway. I think that might be fun.
I think it'd be fun.
I think she and I would get along great because I don't think we agree on anything.
You're both feisty people.
Yeah.
I'll say that.
Yeah. So in the studio today is Alex Talcott. He is, I don't even know how to describe you. You're kind of like a jack of all trades. You do everything. You're a financial consultant. You're a lawyer. You do political consulting. Do you want to talk about like some of your business? Give some promotions to some of your businesses?
Sure. Yeah. Kind of mostly here in my capacity as a learner and a teacher. So I teach at the University of New Hampshire's business school, also Southern New Hampshire University's Hooksett campus, and at Great Bay Community College in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So I have 5 classes at 3 campuses this fall. And yes, as you said, have a wealth management business. We also have a tax division and an estate planning division. That is a New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and 36 other state operation. And then, in terms of the political thing, I mostly do election protection. This is pretty much what I like to do, kind of almost nonpartisan, cooperative, because that's really, as far as even the Republican National Lawyers Association, their number one best practice is get to know the lawyers on the other side and collaborate in the spirit of getting it right. Not just being a zealous advocate for your side. Right. When it comes to elections, and especially in a culture of election security internationally, we really should be on the same team. So I find that to be a very nonpartisan thing, and I always pride myself on my students not being able to guess where I stand. Because I invite guest speakers from both sides, host different people in my own home and local businesses. I'm much more interested in the debate than I am necessarily the outcome all the time.
Great. And you've made me an offer. You've made me a boatload of money. I want to thank you for that. If you have a portfolio, you ought to be turning it over to Alex, because Alex just calls me out of the blue one day. It's like August, and I'm just driving around Lawrence doing my thing. And he's like, listen, I want to move some of your stuff around. I want to do this. I know you're not going to want to do this when you hear me say it, but trust me. Do you trust me? I said, yeah, okay, I trust you. He did. He divested me in one thing. He bought a whole bunch of other stuff, and it went through the roof, right?
Well, we have a really great team. The ability that I'm able to be here and talking at the high level on some of these topics in our society is because I have a team of 6, who are, manning the ship, screening a lot of funds, really taking great care of our people. So we're very fortunate. We've been able to scale up to over 2,000 households.
Nice.
And it doesn't, I think you'd agree, it doesn't really feel that way, right?
Right, yeah.
It's in a pretty quiet office.
Yeah.
It's not loud. We're not yelling, buy, sell.
Right.
That's
you walk in, it feels like a small bank.
We want it to feel like that secure and that comfortable for people. That is very much our culture.
So the election was this week. Obviously, people like me not real happy about some of it. I was watching around the country some of the things that were going on. I was paying attention to the Georgia governor's race. I was paying attention to the Florida governor's race. Without going to Georgia, because that's like a whole hour in and of itself. The Florida governor's race. You were a little bit involved in that, right?
Well, I mean, I was watching a handful of other races, and it really just came down to like friendship. Where were my friends involved? Because I'm rooting for them in some ways. And I have some friends who have been involved in Florida recounts over the years. Florida is a fascinating state because talk about a state that just totally doesn't have its act together in some ways. Like it's a thing that headlines are Florida man ... and something crazy happened, or they were one of the early states even before the opioid crisis was spoken about it as a national level. That was a state that was like, ridiculous for prescription drug security. But meanwhile, to get life insurance licensed in Florida, I had to go get fingerprinted at my local police precinct and send it down to Florida because they were serious about that. And believe it or not, maybe you believe it, because of Bush v. Gore, that band stayed together. The gang gets back together.
Right.
So if people are deployed to different states, absent a recount, and there is going to be a recount by statute in Florida in the U.S. Senate race under 0.5% of a margin, that's a state that doesn't need a lot of out-of-state attention. A lot of lawyers are like, oh, yeah, I can go to Florida and help out. They're looking for a vacation.
Right.
But frankly, they're not needed as much.
Looking to expense it to the company.
Yeah, Manny Iglesias is really involved in election operations down in Florida. So believe it or not, that's a state that we feel is in really good hands in terms of getting the right outcome. Other states that I was looking at, Missouri was a major one because one of my lawyer friends wound up being deployed to St. Louis from Washington, D.C., because St. Louis is a place in Missouri that's right on the river, and there's been a history of people voting in both states, the other state being Illinois.
Mm-hmm. Wait, the Democrats tell us there's no such thing as voter fraud. How could that possibly be? People voting in two different states, really? Shocking.
Yeah, I don't think it happens much. I don't know enough about it personally, but it's taken seriously enough that some resources were put toward putting a D.C. lawyer who's highly experienced and a group of other people to be stationed down there to protect that vote. And when you know it, that race wound up not being very close for Senator-elect Josh Hawley. I thought it was fascinating that he wound up winning by so much, considering I was at an election law seminar this summer for 2 days in St. Louis with lawyers from all around the country, and his name was not spoken once at that conference. Wow. And I was asking some of the local attorneys there, are you not that excited about him as a candidate? Is that why we're not emphasizing him so much? And kind of amazing he closed so hard. Obviously, the president and the vice president were boots on the ground there in Indiana. Indeed, the states that they went to were not only victories, but they were not coattailing on sure thing victories. Right. They helped drive those wins.
The polls were all wrong again, right? The polls were all wrong again. Whether it was the Florida race, whether it was the Missouri race, whether it was the Georgia race, certainly, and even some of the Senate races, they had, even if they called the candidate the right candidate, the percentages were all completely wrong. When are we going to learn as a country to stop? You would think after Donald Trump, if CNN came on and said a poll recently said today, that everybody would just change the channel, because we know these polls really don't mean anything. They're not doing it right. It's not like the old days where they could call everybody's home phone, right, and get a really good pulse of, these people are voters, they're super voters, we know how they're going to vote. Now everybody's got cell phones, everybody's got text messaging.
There was some really good New York Times transparency about their methods in their polling. So they were having on their main page in real time the 3 or 4 races that they were polling at any given time. I was actually surprised to see that some dials were being made after 9:30 p.m. They were calling cell phone numbers in many cases too, but to get the approximately 350 or more responses that they wanted in a congressional district, they were making 32 to 33,000 phone calls to get those 300 or 400 responses. So some people think that methodology shows that low response rate really invalidates the quality of those polls. The worst poll that I saw in New Hampshire in the lead up to the race was one that showed Sununu winning by more than a dozen points among independents, and yet being within only 1 point plus or minus to his opponent. If you're winning by 13, 15, 17 points among independents in New Hampshire,
it's over. You won.
It's over. Yeah. So they were oversampling Democrats. So the biggest partisan polling issue that I've seen is oversampling of registered Democrats.
Do you think that they do it on purpose? I happen to think that they do it on purpose. That they'll do like what they do with Sununu, so that Sununu will feel comfortable and not campaign as much with independents. Or are they just really incompetent?
I tend to lend more towards incompetence because across networks, I'm constantly hearing mispronunciation of long-serving leaders, which makes me disregard everything else that the pundit says. Mm-hmm. So I was listening to the POTUS moderate Sirius radio station, and they mispronounced the name of Senator Leahy of Vermont, who's only been in the United States Senate
150 years.
Yeah. So he joined the U.S. Senate in 1969, and you're calling him Leahy. I don't care about your opinion about anything else. But unfortunately, midday Fox News, I heard the same thing. I heard some pretty nasty mispronunciations that made me really question the seriousness of their analysis. or the seriousness of but their prognostication, but also their kind of normative opinion on things I was disregarding.
So now the election happens, and as we all knew this was going to, anybody who watches, especially cable news on any even small frequency, we all knew what was going to happen after Election Day. We knew Jeff Sessions was going to be kicked out, right? We knew that he was waiting for the midterms to happen so he could get rid of Sessions, without even talking about whether that's a good or a bad thing. I then turn on CNN, because that's my go-to, and they're all shocked. Oh my God, I can't believe it. Elizabeth Warren, who tweeted out about a year ago that Jeff Sessions should be fired because he's awful and he's mean and he's a right-winger and he's terrible, yesterday tweeted that this was an abomination to our democracy that he fired Jeff. I'm like, wait, you're not even smart enough to be on your own side. You don't even remember what you tweeted a year ago.
Yeah, what I found was they went from the shocked to the shocked, as you say, when it was revealed that the president asked for the Attorney General to tender his resignation and then proceeded to have a news conference knowing full well that this news was already in the works. And then it comes out like right after that. So that was a little bit of the media shocked about that. But the Senator Sessions situation is one that I've been following for a few years. I met then Senator Sessions in Dover, New Hampshire in the fall of 2016. And what I recall is when I used the phrase rule of law in conversation with him at a cookout, his eyes just absolutely lit up. Like, that's the phrase. If you want to hit it off with Jeff Sessions, say rule of law, which is a term of art. It has a very specific legal meaning, and it's a major value for him. And wouldn't you know it, on the way out, in his resignation letter that was released, he said, most importantly, ... rule of law, and then repeated the same phrase in the next paragraph. So he's somebody who kind of retrospectively is being given the McCain treatment for being a champion of the rule of law.
2 days ago, they hated him. He was an evil right-wing Nazi. But now that Trump has fired him, isn't it awful what they did to him? He was such a great guy.
Yeah.
It's like they don't even think that their audience is smart enough to remember what they said 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. When he was initially nominated, remember his nomination was announced before the inauguration. And prior to the inauguration, I had written an editorial in Foster's Daily Democrat newspaper, which is actually, believe it or not, a center-right newspaper up in New Hampshire.
Yeah, we hate them.
I was writing for them, supporting Senator Sessions' nomination and kind of highlighting a lot of moments of bipartisanship in his career to surprise people, because that's what's missed when we're talking about the law, whether it's the administration of the law by the Department of Justice or the Supreme Court. Everyone thinks that everything is like a 5-4 decision. It's like, I can show you 9-0 and 8-1 decisions in the last several years. There are a lot of things in the law that are just right and wrong. And for a lot of conservatives, they like a natural law way of thinking about the law, that there are right and wrong things in the universe, and then we just need to come up with laws that express that. There's another legal philosophy other than law and economics that can also be quite conservative. It's a legal positivist view, which says the law is the law, just that, no more, no less.
Right.
And that's a way of thinking that's very Jeff Sessions, where he was pretty interested in a neutral administration of the laws. And for some people, that's a good guy, bad guy, mean daddy approach to the administration of justice.
Well, it's a very public safety way of looking at things. I mean, police officers show up. You either hit your girlfriend or you didn't. You either stole the tool out of the tool store or you didn't.
Now he did have a bit of a personal bias, like thinking that marijuana smokers are bad people, sort of a thing. So he definitely had some of that going on, but he wasn't really looking to advocate for new laws from the Department of Justice. He was more than enough busy trying to administer the ones before him.
I think he was the wrong person for Attorney General. I think I'm heartbroken that the president has gotten rid of him. I wanted him to stay, regardless of all this Russia stuff. I think if Trump just left the Russia stuff alone, Mueller, I know Robert Mueller. I've met him twice. we got some great pictures with him when I was down at the police memorial during the Obama administration.
You're pronouncing it like Bueller, like Ben Stein. Mueller, and remember, Ben Stein called President Trump yesterday, magical or a magician or something?
Yeah. So. I forgot where I was going with it.
Who would have been the right choice?
But, I don't know. I think Chris Christie, being a former prosecutor, I think a former prosecutor would have been a good choice. I think Jeff Sessions, here's my hope. My hope is that Donald Trump's going to take a deep breath over the next couple of days, realize how valuable Jeff Sessions is, realize how he's wronged Jeff Sessions. I don't disagree with much of what Donald Trump does, but on this one I do. Publicly humiliating him, publicly calling him out. This guy was as loyal to Donald Trump as anybody has ever been. You could tell he's very emotional about the way this has all happened. I would like for them to put him in charge of Secret Service, put him in charge of something else.
This is why you're not just a man on the street. This is why your opinions are so informed. The fact that you know what Chris Christie's job was 2 jobs ago, that he was a federal prosecutor, most people don't know that. They just remember him as being a big blowhard sort of a thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe they know that he was governor of New Jersey, but in this day and age, even with Wikipedia for crying out loud, most people don't know the CVs of these people in position of leadership. And that absolutely, after he was a private practice attorney and a major fundraiser for George W. Bush, in New Jersey, he was a federal prosecutor, United States attorney. But I think we're seeing him as a shortlister now.
Right, yeah. And I think Jeff Sessions was a great attorney general. Look, everybody who follows me know I go live on Facebook. I chase police calls in Lawrence. We go to every shooting, fires, whatever's going on, rapes, anything that's happening in the city. We go live and we show people live what's going on with no editorial content, no skewing of anything. And Jeff Sessions, when Donald Trump called out Dan Rivera and the city of Lawrence as being the hub of the opioid crisis in New England, and the mayor of Lawrence, Dan Rivera, turned it into a race issue and said, he's picking on us because we're brown, it's racism. Jeff Sessions sent an alphabet soup of federal agencies into Lawrence and literally drained the swamp to the point where Lawrence's violent crime is now down 65% this year than what it was last year at this time. Violent crime is at its lowest point in Lawrence than it has been in the last 60-something years. And if I ever thought that I would be publicly saying that about the city of Lawrence that I've been covering now for my whole life, I never would have believed it. But now we drive around Lawrence. It used to be, last year at this time, we'd be driving around Lawrence, there'd be at least 3 gun calls. There'd be at least 3 shots fired called, and at least 1 person would be getting hit a night, right? Now we drive around Lawrence, and it's like if we get a domestic violence call, we're all excited. If there's an accident on Haverhill Street, we're excited because there's a call. I mean, the police.
That's pretty honest. I understand what you're saying.
And it's because
it comes out wrong, but it comes out honest. I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So the federal agents have come in and they've literally drained the swamp in Lawrence. They've deported, by my count alone, more than 350 to 400 people who were very big gang leaders, who were not just selling drugs on the street, but they were the traffickers that were bringing it in, packaging it. They had a whole operation going, and these guys very quietly just came in over the last year and just literally drained the swamp. And that's all Jeff Sessions.
If there's anything that you care about as much as journalism, it's public safety. So here's a kind of style of gotcha journalism that I think that you might appreciate is in evaluating attorneys general. The next time somebody on the left or the right says, oh, well, so-and-so was a good attorney general or something, say, oh, yeah, name 3 others.
Right.
Do they have a context of anybody else who's really performed in that role? Mm-hmm. Can they come up with an Eric Holder or a John Ashcroft? Do they have a point of comparison? Because a lot of people are kind of gratuitous with their compliments or their critiques, whether it's a prospective judge or other high government official. And you can really stump people by asking them to name just 2 others to evaluate pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, they don't know.
Yeah, most people just go by what they see on TV. They regurgitate what their friends say at the water cooler. Most people, they have opinions, but it's not really their opinions. They've kind of adopted other people's opinions because they sound good, right? And they sound smart. And then when you start, what you just said, when you start drilling down, you start asking them questions, you find out they really don't know a whole lot.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, the value of this show. I think, if anything else, this show is to educate people. When people email me and they, when people email me and they say, I totally disagree with your position on X, Y, and Z, I'm thrilled because they disagree with me and they're still watching. I get emails all the time from people who say, I read the Valley Patriot and I can't believe you wrote this in your editorial. It's horrible. It's terrible. You're awful. You're a right-wing Nazi. I love it because they're quoting what's in the editorial, which means they read the editorial even though going in they didn't agree with anything. They knew they weren't going to agree with anything I said.
So let's leverage Tom Duggan and CNN a little bit more and point out that CNN's reporting of another front-runner to succeed Attorney General Sessions is Pam Bondi of Florida.
Oh, my God, I'm in.
Well, she might be a little...
Both feet, I'm in.
Well, here's an interesting thing about her, though, to show like a time when maybe she's crossed a political divide in a way. So as Attorney General of Florida in the storm season, when she took to the media, it was really to get out the word as a warning to area businesses to avoid price gouging, because there's a Florida statute against price gouging. So in times of an emergency like that, can a Motel 6 kind of raise its rates $10 or $50 here and there? Yeah, maybe. Can they raise their rates 10,000% and take advantage of people in that situation? No, they cannot by statute. So some people who are truly libertarian or true believers all the way in the free market would say they should price it however they want under any circumstances and leave it up to the marketplace to shame them for doing so. But in Florida, there's a law that define certain parameters for price gouging that are akin to usury. And so she, in her capacity as a Republican Attorney General, was protecting the consumer, protecting the citizenry, but in a manner that was arguably anti-free market. So there she was, following the rule of law. Right.
I would be thrilled if Pam Bondi became the Attorney General. I think she's absolutely stunning, and I would love to be able to look at her every day on TV doing stuff. Every time she's on Fox, even if she's on CNN a couple of times, I'm watching anything she does. I don't even care how good she is. She's just beautiful. I just love watching her. Joe Dunn asks, will Georgia and Florida races be stolen by the Democrats?
If you ask Manny Iglesias of Florida, who's most involved in the recount efforts there, his opening statement when he's rallying a group of volunteer lawyers is, Democrats lie, cheat, and steal. They're out to get the election. So he opens with that. So he kind of like sets the parameters out there in almost like a Sarah Palin like kind of way that even if you don't buy it all the way, he creates enough space to want to be on your toes and want to be vigorous. But no, the attorneys who I know down in Florida are pretty top notch. They're quite organized. I would say the two best organized states for election protection this past season were Florida and Missouri.
Really? So if the Republican wins either of those states, what is the chances that the Democrats going to be yelling and screaming that it was stolen from them? Because that's what they do. They always accuse others of what they're doing.
Yeah, they might not even need to go that route because there's already a little bit of momentum behind Beto O'Rourke of Texas coming off a loss to perhaps run for president now.
Right. Well, he's the second coming of Christ.
But you know what? You can absolutely come off a loss. That's not just the left propping up an ideal disruptor. Lincoln was coming off a U.S. Senate loss 2 years prior to his election. So that saying that there are no second acts in American politics is manifestly false.
Right.
Not only given Lincoln and Richard Nixon, but how about Michelle Bachmann, who was leading in the polls for president once upon a time, who had lost a school board race at home? You can absolutely lose elections and go on to major service. I think President Clinton lost a race for student council when he was in high school or college. So you can lose.
Anything else? We got about 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes left. Anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up today's show there, Alex Talcott?
Well, what we should maybe talk about or ask about is kind of the so what in terms of policy going forward. In the lead up to the election, if the right was about the caravan and maybe federal judgeships, and the left was alluding to health care, but mainly in the context of don't lose the gains of the Affordable Care Act, the fact that we're not going into January with some ready-made votes on legislation here or there, it's a really nice opportunity before we get into the thick of the holidays to maybe reach out to our current members and our members-to-be and kind of let them know, get drafting on some legislation. Here's what we want you to do. Because you'll notice we don't really have a ready-made debate about being for or against this law or that law. So, whether it's a tax cut, whether it's infrastructure, let's start penning to paper, folks, and have something to be either for or against.
Right. Do the Democrats, are they for anything? We know they're against Donald Trump. Donald Trump's a bad person. He's evil. But are they for anything? Now that they've taken over the House, are they going to champion anything? Or are they just going to challenge Donald Trump on everything he does?
I was kind of surprised that President Obama didn't get Guantanamo closed and a variety of things that he had political capital for 9 years ago. They can absolutely be constructive folks who help get infrastructure done. There's no reason not for that to happen other than to deprive the president and the Senate of running on it in 2 years. So infrastructure absolutely should get done. They predominantly are for single-payer healthcare, or at least achieving expanded healthcare by way of a Medicare for all kind of a system, and that polls really well. Expanded family and medical leave polls really well. So, there are a number of things that they or we could and should be able to get done in the next couple of years.
All right. Alex Talcott, thank you so much for coming in. I appreciate you being a guest. Hopefully you'll come back again someday.
Glad to.
Maybe we'll have you back when Paul is here. We can mix it up a little bit more. Thank you, everybody, for listening today, everybody for watching on Facebook. We will see you next week. I can't remember who it is, but I know we have a guest next week. Make sure you pick up your copy of the Valley Patriot. Our new edition, the November edition, comes out tomorrow. Don't forget to pick up my book, Heroes in Our Midst, from the pages of the Valley Patriot. And we're going to have another big announcement, I think, next week, so make sure you catch that show. Thank you, Ed Sullivan, for being our fine producer, the voice of Purgatory. Didn't hear much from you today, but we appreciate you being here. And good luck to Craig from Success in 603, and make sure you get his listen to his podcast within the next hour, right? You're going to go on within the next hour? He's going on right next, so make sure you catch him. We're on Spotify, we're on Google Play, we're on Podbean, we're everywhere. Make sure you download the audio of the show, and we'll see you next week. Melvin Taylor says go home, so go home already.
Telling you to go home.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.